view folder, and it's going to display a registration page. Okay, now that registration page should be like all the other pages that we've looked at in the in the music app so far. View products, your product listing page, and so forth. We're just going to have a page there. It's going to call the header. It's going to call the aside. It's going to call the footer, and so forth. Okay. Now we might look at that and say, well, actually, if we're going to have that, then it's going to, because you've got, again, you're making decisions and choices here. Okay. Are we going to, when you actually go and register, is it going to be just kind of the main portion of that MVC, or do we still need to have the aside with the different links to the different products? Okay, now that's a decision you need to make, because there's an implication there. Because if, for example, we're going to have the products or the links on the side for the different categories, then what we would need to do here is we would need to have dollar categories is equal to get the get categories method or function, because we need to have dollar categories to be able to produce this page, reg page, because it in turn is using the aside, and the aside needs to have a variable called dollar categories, which has a list of all the categories so that it can build the links at the side. Okay, so it's sort of this process that we look at, and we're saying, right, we've got a switch action, it's show registration page. We need to say to ourselves, what do I want to show on the page? So just think of it as a blank screen, right? You're going to have to generate that whole page. Is actually there. Okay, you'll have probably you will have your header and your footer. Okay, it's a decision for you then what else you have. Okay, and I would probably suggest, yeah, you probably do need something else there. But you will sometimes see in cases where you've got a something like this, that the registration page actually is just a complete page. So you've got maybe the header and the footer, and then a complete page in the middle, and you've got limited features available on the side. Okay, so you get to this page, you're just registering. Okay, it's also a case that in some sites what will happen is you don't get to see the full value of the website until you're actually logged in. Okay, so again, these are decisions that you're going to make with regard to your particular application. Right now, the next piece then, right, is, and again, I'm taking this because it's kind of a good example, right, is sort of kind of look at back end and start looking at your database needs. Okay, so so what do we need, right? Obviously, you'll have a database for the thing, your My Guitar Shop one, or whatever you're going to call it. Okay, but we're now going to have to need a user table. Okay, so what are we going to call that? Again, at this stage, what you're doing is when I find it useful, when you consider that, okay, I need a table to put in the user information, you know what it is, give it a name. Okay, so I'm going to call it users, right? Now, what fields do I need? So, and here you have to start thinking, and this is where I think the more you document, the easier it becomes. Okay, there are different philosophies on how you would actually go about developing your application. Okay, and this is not just true of something like this, but in general software terms. You could look at the kind of the traditional way, which would be, I'm going to build up all of my documentation, all of my specifications, and have a very detailed document put together. Okay, or you could go on a more, and that would have been a more traditional way of doing things. And you kind of have this waterfall method of, right, we start here and everything is kind of very highly spec'd up without even developing anything at all. Okay, there's still a lot of good value in that approach. Okay, The other method then is kind of what you kind of call more agile computing or agile methodology. And that's where you kind of look at kind of the main features. You don't get too stuck into the details until you actually get into the development phase, and then you're getting in kind of on top of it. There's a lot more liaison with the client and with the customer and with the developers and testers and so forth in that method. And we need to put some kind of a combination around that, I think, is the best way of doing a lot of this stuff. What I would suggest and what I normally do when developing an application is to actually look at it from the perspective of, okay, what's required? So at a high level, what's required here is a click, reserve, and collect system. Okay, you start looking at that, and you start using your knowledge, you start using your creativity, and you're saying, right, I'm going to break this down into a number of smaller steps. And then you start looking at each step and you say, right, okay, for this step here, I am going to need to, okay, I need to display a page for registration, right? Oh, wait, actually, do you know, I'll need to have a table for users as well. Okay, what do I actually want to get from the user for details, right? Now, this is where it gets really fascinating, right? Because you know, what fields do you need? Okay, so if I'm registering for something like a click and collect, what do I actually need to know? Has the customer or this client, or will they at the future be possibly posting the or couriering the product to the client? In which case you need to have their address. Could somebody be ordering something for somebody else and they want it delivered to a different address? Okay, so these are all questions that you need to start kind of weighing in your mind, right? Now, one of the issues and one of the constraints we can have with agile development, and indeed with any development, is I like to call it creeping featureism. And what I mean by that is that as we start thinking of what we're going to do, we start adding all these extra features. So the remit that we've got is a click, reserve, and collect. And suddenly Peter is off on this tangent saying, oh, we're going to ship it to them. We're going to post it out to them or use a courier. We're going to maybe have a different shipping address than the user address because I want to buy you all a present and post it out to you, which I'm not doing, right? Okay, so that's a feature that isn't part of the original spec. It may well be a good feature. It may be something that at some stage in the future we might implement, but you say to yourself, no, that's not being implemented now. However, you may decide, I'm going to leave the path open though to be able to implement that in the future easily. Okay, so we're always kind of thinking about, you know, when you come across an idea and you say, well, actually, no, that's not part of the spec, I'm not going to implement it. We sometimes will actually think, I'm not going to implement it fully, but I am going to leave provision for it to be implemented. So you kind of keep that in your head. Anyhow, that's the creeping featureism of this lecture, I suppose. Here we're looking at the user. Okay, so we'll need to have an ID field. And again, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, when we're looking at ID, websites typically will use IDs for most tables, apart from link tables. Okay, because it's a handy, easy way of being able to transmit information. It has a degree of security about it as well. So we're always going to be using these. When we're linking tables with foreign keys and so forth, that is actually being done then as a way, in sense that we what we'll actually do is we will link on the IDs of different tables. Okay, we want to try and have everything fast, and in terms of query times, we want to have everything kind of fast in terms of typing times as well, okay, for development purposes. So I think it's a very good idea to have use the ID, first of all, and it's a very good idea to kind of standardize yourself on the format of an ID, because if we're putting in a foreign key between two tables and we're using the ID, the primary key of one table, to link to another field in a different table, both those fields need to be identical in terms of the type of variable it is and the length of the variable. Okay, so I always will start off with an ID, and just because of the way it's set up, I have it of type int, and I'll have it 11 characters, and I'll always have it auto increment. Right. The reason for the auto increment such is to ensure that it makes it easy to add a new record. Okay, if I didn't have an auto increment and I wanted to add a new user, I would have to actually go back, query the database to find out what was the highest ID value that was used, then add one to it and then insert that. Whereas if I use auto increment, I don't have to worry about that particular field. Okay, just when I do the insert, it'll automatically increment that. Okay, now if I keep all my IDs like that, right, it means that if I'm creating a foreign key, because to create a foreign key, you have to create an index on the field. And also that field, then its type and length has to be identical to the other key that you're linking it to. Okay, so for example, you couldn't link an integer to a varchar. You can't even link an int of size 10 or length 10 to an int of size or length 11. Okay, so they have to be identical. So then we get into the other things. We might need a first name, we might need a last name, we might need a username, or it might be an email. We might have, for some reason, we might need a date of birth. If it's, say you're selling wine, you might need a date of birth to make sure they're over 18 or whatever. And that brings up a whole topic of stuff there. You may need address info. And if you're looking at address info, again, don't be reinventing the wheel. Look at other sites and see, well, what actual details are they asking me to enter in? Okay, how do I complete things? Okay, so I'll probably need an email address if it's such a thing that I want to, if they reserve something and they haven't collected it, I might want to send them an email, so I might need their email address. Or if I, as part of my process, when the order is ready, I'm going to send them out an email notification. I'll need their email address. I might need their mobile number if I decide I'm going to do it with text messaging as opposed to emails. Okay. If you're looking at address info, then you might be looking at, country information, a county. You might be looking at air code or zip code of the right side of the country. And there brings in an interesting thing. Are you limiting it to the just to your local area, to Ireland? If so, you could say, right, just stick with air. If you're somewhere, say like in Dundalk, then you'd be looking at a postcode because you could well get visitors from north of the border coming down. Okay. If you're doing it international, then you've got like, it could be America, it could be zip codes. So how are you going to manage that? Okay. Now, as we get through the module, we'll see that there are ways of actually being able to do that. But what we need to be doing at this stage is thinking. Remember, we're looking at the database. So as we're putting all this together, we can have a choice. We could do two things, right? We could just sit here and type out all this stuff, okay? Or we could actually go on what I recommend, okay? I don't think I can do it here actually. We could actually go into our PHP MyAdmin, create a new table, add the fields, and as we're thinking about what we're doing, as we're designing it, we're actually filling out the structure of the table in PHP MyAdmin. Okay, and that allows two things to happen. One, it means we have we need to document what we're doing, but what we're actually doing is we're documenting it in the platform that we're going to implement it on. So we're doing it in PHP admin. We will need to have entity relationship diagram put together at some stage. You can do that in the design aspect of PHP MyAdmin. You're going to have a user table in your database. So rather than just talking about it, why not just implement it? Okay, straight up, and you have it documented. Then you can always do a a screen cut paste to put it into any document that might. So what we're doing here is essentially what has happened is that from if you like on the right hand side, we've said we've need to registration, right? We've put in some details that we've thought about at the time. When we look at registration, then we're looking at how we're going to actually implement that to a certain extent. We're then looking into this the controller. What do we need to actually do there? See my spelling mistakes here. So this view page, we know that the view page is going to show some kind of a form, and it's going to have all of the different inputs. What inputs do we need? Those inputs need to be tied to the database. So we're looking at the database here, okay? And then we can start looking at the actual regpage.php, okay? So we can now start working on this. Okay, so what do we need? We need to include the header. Right. There's a question mark about the aside. Again, this is all just you're going to do there. We're going to form with inputs. Okay, so let's start listing out the inputs. Right, the first one we're going to need is we're going to need a hidden input with a name of action equals. Remember what's going to happen here. We're going to show somebody is going to press a button on the page. It's going to send an action value, or it's going to send action equals to show reg page to the controller. The controller is then going to display this page reg_page.php. Somebody's going to fill out the form, hopefully, okay? And when they're finished at the form, they're going to hit the submit button. When they hit the submit button, what we need to do is we need to actually send a message back to the controller with all of the inputs that they've added, plus an extra input called action. And that's going to be, rather than show registration, it's going to be reg user, okay, or something like that, whatever you want to call it, okay? So what's going to happen is we're going to send an action value back. And that action value is going to inform the controller, okay, I should have all the details here. So you need to actually create a new record, or at least validate stuff, a new record to make sure that the user is registered. Okay. Now, where does that put us? Right. Now, we're going to have this hidden input name equals. So the name is going to be equal to action. Oops. And the value is going to be equal to reg user. Okay. So that's how we actually send it in. So this is going to have an input. It's going to have obviously the type. Going to be equal to hidden. It's going to have a name of action. It's going to have a value of user. So that means that when the user hits submit, remember what happens when you hit submit, all of the inputs in the form are going to be sent to the server, okay? The form method will be post, its action will be nothing, okay? So it means it's just staying where it is, the same page, which is the controller text.php in the controller, and all the inputs will be sent over to it. Now, for the other input names, that should be equal to, and this is just a suggestion, but it does make life very, very easy. The input name should be equal to the same name as the database table. Okay. So if we've got in our database, we're calling the first name F name, then the input name here is equal to F name. If it's F uppercase N name, then the name in the form is F uppercase N name. If we're using the actual word first name, then the name is equal to first name, right? And I would recommend you do that, because that way you're building in consistency to what you're doing, and you've got now where you don't have to think when you want to get a variable name. You don't have to think what's actually going on. You know that the name is called, F uppercase name or whatever. Okay. So you do that for all the inputs, and all the inputs will be the same as, there's no point in getting an input if you cannot save it in your database. Okay. So if you're getting address information, you get address information. If you're not going to save the address information, there's no point in getting it. Okay. Now, you might also note here, you might also have some client side validation. Okay, so you need the HTML5 required. You might have regular expressions. You don't remember that from first year, the regex. You might have, for example, if you want to double check the email address, okay, you might have checks on email, enter it twice. Same with password as well. Might want to do that. So you'll need to have a JavaScript for that. And that's been done on the actual client itself, okay? So stuff like that. You again, what you're doing here is you're putting in these little memories as you think about what's going on, right? You could, for example, if you want to get really advanced, if you're selecting a username, right, and letting the user select it, or if check the email. What you're looking at here, guys, and what I'm trying to get at here is, okay, somebody's registering and you're putting in your email address. You could use jQuery and Ajax. Check if the username / email already used. So I put it in email, and as soon as I go to the next field, what it actually does is there'll be an Ajax check to see, has this email address been used already? Is there somebody registered with this email address already? And if it is, then what you want to do is you want to come back and you want to alert them to that fact and suggest to them maybe that you could try logging in with this email address. Okay. Same if you're letting people pick their username, then exactly the same thing. Then you say, sorry, this username is already used. Now, whether or not you want to get fancy, like so many other places, like with Gmail and that kind of stuff, and give suggestions as to what you can use for a username, that's up to you. I wouldn't particularly bother with it so far. Okay, so as you can see, you're just building and building and building. Okay. Now, just nearly done for the moment here. So what I'm looking at next is, let's say we've got all this done, right? Somebody hits submit. So what's going to happen then is we'll go back to the controller. And what we're now going to have is we're going to have another case here. And the case is going to be equal to the hidden value that we had here. The action value was reg_user. Okay. So we go back in here and we've got a case now of reg_user. Now, what we need to do here is, get all the input values. We're going to have a load of filter inputs, right? You're then going to insert into the database. Okay. Now, if you've already, as part of the registration process, had Ajax to check that this user email address doesn't exist and that the or the username doesn't exist, okay, then you're inserting into the add user, okay, the add user function, right, which will have all the different inputs on it. It doesn't need to check to see if everything is correct, or that that the email address hasn't been used before, or that the username hasn't been used before. Okay, but if on the other hand you haven't, then this function add user is going to need to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to add a wee box in here and have the model, because this is where the model starts working at. So we're going to have a model, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I typically will create a PHP file for each of the database tables. So I might have a user_db.php, and inside that it'll have a function, add user. And it'll have the different variables coming in there and everything that's required. Okay. Okay. Now it will probably all the stuff normally does. I'll probably return some. It's always a good idea if you're doing something like adding a user or adding a product or adding an order to get some kind of positive feedback if it's successful, and some negative feedback then if it's unsuccessful. Okay, and in regard to the negative feedback, so if you like, this could return true if everything's okay, right? Or when would it not allow you to add a user? Okay, so you could have if an error. Okay, you could have an error. You need to report it. You could have a email already used. You need to report it, and then relay that information back to the user. Saying, "Sorry, we can't register you because your email is already registered. Try logging in or something like that." Or you could have a username already used. Okay. So there are issues like that. I don't know if you want to get into the detail of, if that error code has already been used. I don't think anybody's doing that, because you could theoretically have two people in the same household with the same error code, the same name. If your daughter was named after the mother or the son was named after the father, you could have the same name and error code. Normally, it's just looking at username and looking at email address. Right? So again, if you get an error message, you have to handle that. Okay, that's handled in the controller. Okay, so the function will determine whether or not it can insert a new user or not, and if it can't, then it needs to send back specific information. How we do that, sometimes we do that by saying, right, if it's the email address is, we'll return 1 or true if everything's okay. We return a negative number if it's not. So that would trigger what we call a false. So if we do if add user, if the function add user returns a 1, then that's true. If it doesn't return a 1, then it's false. So we could do if bracket add user bracket with all the stuff on our bracket. And if that's true, we'll get the right answer, in which case we want to probably go the user to log in, right? Or we may decide to automatically log them in. Some places do, which is a good idea, I think. If it's not true, it means we've got an error. So we could return, -1, -2, -3, -4. If it's -1, it means the username has been used already. 2, the email address has been used already. -3 could be some other reason. The database is offline or whatever it's going to be. Okay. So again, you just start adding all of those functions. Right now, I'm just been rattling on here for far too long. That's building up what we need, if you like, in terms of just one feature that we've outlined here. So the stages, if you like, of this is to kind of, on the left-hand side, we'll outline the major features. Then we get into the next line, we kind of build a little bit more meat onto that feature. Then we start looking at, okay, how does the controller react? We looked at what will the form or what will the view look like? Is there any model implications? What the database looks like, and so forth. Okay, so that's the story to date. Okay, so I would suggest that what you'll do now is for the CA, for the rest of this class now, what you'll actually do is try and build that out for yourself. Okay, I'm here, so if we need any help or advice or whatever, we can work that one out. Okay, but try and get either in something like this, the whiteboard, or pieces of paper or whatever. Some people will look at it and they'll actually, draw out what the page is going to look like and put all the shapes of it and so forth. Or you can, do it as you're developing as such. So in the same way that you actually have gone and started building up your database, when you build your database, then okay, get the registration form and build it together. Okay. Now you might say, right, I'm not going to put in all the check and features yet. I'll do that at a later date, but you can then come back into your design document and you can draw lines through different pieces that you have completed. So you might, for example, leave space for the 2 passwords to make sure that somebody enters password twice, and you're going to at a later date do a client-side JavaScript checking of the 2 passwords to make sure they're correct. Okay, you mightn't actually do that at this point, but you're going to do it later on. But you have the provision there first. Okay, now sort of looking at it from the perspective of obviously we're doing things in an MVC, so the model view controller aspect. Okay. How do we actually go about defining our web application and actually designing our way around how we're going to do it? Okay, so I'm just going to throw up a so you can see the whiteboard there. We're looking in a situation where we're looking at our MVC, our model. Okay, so it's we know in our MVC that we're looking at the model, the view, and the controller. Okay, and I'm just going to concentrate for a moment on the view part of that. Okay, so we're looking at a scenario where we kind of want to, and this sort of kind of comes under what we call storyboarding and such. What we want to do is we want to actually depict what our web pages are actually going to look like. Okay, so we'll use the CA as a CA, the shopping cart or the click and collect as a model for doing this as such. And we say, right, how are we going to implement it? Okay. Now I'll work off an assumption that we have a general website. So we should have, for example, good, right. So we'll work on the assumption that we have this. You can, by the way, as well, you can hold down your left mouse key and you can pan the whole thing around as well, zooming in and out. So you've got your general website. So what I was looking at in terms of just as an idea there was that we're going to take the music app. So you have the music MVC. Now I would suggest to you that you go a little bit further with that and change it around a wee bit and don't have it all just looking the same as mine. Okay, but as a general idea, we have that. Now, what I'm going to sort of say, I'm just going to concentrate, if you like, on the new features that I'm going to add to that existing music app. Okay, so if we think about what needs to be kind of new features required. So the first thing we're going to need is we need to have a registration. We need to be able to register new users. We need to have a login. Okay. We probably need, and again, this is where you let your creativity go kind of a wee bit wild here, and you think to yourself, right, what are the kind of the basic pieces that I need, and then what are going to be the extra pieces needed to provide all of those features to a certain extent. So we'll have the product listing. We need to have some kind of shopping cart symbol, okay, which will, we'll just put that in as a thought. And when we're doing online shopping, once we start shopping, there needs to be an ability to view your shopping cart. There needs to be ability to obviously add to your shopping cart. You need the ability to remove from your shopping cart. You're looking at cases where you're adding a product to your shopping cart. you're looking at situations where it's going to recalculate the cost associated with the order. You might be looking at situations where you add a product, but you want to actually add 2 of those products, so you're changing the quantity. Okay, and you're getting then when you can click a button to display your shopping cart. So when we say we're talking about needing a shopping cart, there's actually a whole range that come in there. So it's probably a good idea to start looking at them. So there's the kind of show I'll just call it SC for shopping cart. You want to add to the shopping cart. Remove shopping cart. You want to complete the order then. Just a complete shopping cart. Okay, so that would be a couple of things associated just with the whole thing in the shopping cart, right? Now you look then at other areas. There's a need for, if you like, from the back end of the application, we need to add stock. What I'm going to say here, I'm going to need manage stock. So there's a good few things in there, right? So when we're looking at managing stock here, what we're talking about here, okay, obviously need to add new stock. We need to be able to reserve stock. We need to be able to remove stock. So that's when somebody actually comes in, collects the stock and pays for it. Okay. And that would be nearly the main things that are there. So the ability to get for the customer to get new stock in and add to it, the ability to reserve the stock then. So when in our processing, when we actually go and reserve an item of stock, we need to be able to do that, and then we need to be able to remove stock when the person actually comes in and picks it up. Now, I'm just going to put in brackets here because there's another aspect of this that we need to consider, okay? And that is that I am currently browsing to buy something, okay? So I've got my shopping cart. It has somehow checked the stock levels and said, yeah, there's 4 of these in stock, okay? And I have kind of indicated that yes, I want to, but I haven't actually committed to buying that, right? So or to reserving the item yet. So I'm still going through the processing of it. If you like, if you take it, it's sort of a little bit like if you go into your grocery shopping and you have the physical shopping cart there, okay? You're looking on the shelves and you're seeing that yes, there's cornflakes or there's coffee or whatever it is you're looking at. You know that they're available. Okay. Now, we've got a tricky situation because in a shop, physical shop, we can take a packet of cornflakes and put it into our shopping trolley. So it's in the shopping cart. As far as the store is concerned, okay, it still has, let's say there's 10 packets of cornflakes in the shop. There are still 10 packets of cornflakes in the shop. However, one packet is sort of reserved at this stage. Okay, so I've put it into my shopping trolley. Okay, and I go around the shop, but I might then decide I walk down a bit further and there's another packet of cornflakes, but it's on a cheaper offer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and put back the original one that I took. Now, in a store, in a physical store, that can be managed fairly easily. Okay, but online we have to take all that into account. So we have to kind of say, right, if somebody decides to pick an item and put it into their shopping cart, right? Now, bearing in mind that there can be another person on the website at the same time, and they may well be looking for the same item, okay? How do you manage that? What is going to be your process for that, okay? Now, that's something that you decide, right? It's good, worthwhile to inform the customer, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have a disappointed customer at the end. But if I go and I say, right, okay, I want to buy a particular guitar, and there's 2 of them there. Well, let's say there's only one there, right? So there's one of these guitars there. I put that into my shopping cart, but I haven't completed the cycle of saying, okay, reserve this. and then somebody else comes in and they are looking for the same item. How does the shop manage that? Now that's what we call workflow, okay? And that is the process. We have to kind of decide, and you would normally do this in conjunction with the owner to clearly define how this works. One of the really interesting things with software and developing software is, and particularly when we've got back-end algorithms and rules that we need to implement, is it's not the general case that normally trips us up. In terms, I have 10 items of stock. Somebody picks one and puts it into their shopping cart, and then, I don't know, mysteriously they disappear off the internet, to close down the tab. What happens? Do we say that we no longer have that item available? Do we give a time frame for somebody to select an item before they actually go and reserve, formally, if you like, reserve the item? These are kind of fundamental questions. Now, if you have 10 items in stock, it's not a really big issue. But if you've only one item in stock, or if you have 10 items in stock and there's a run on that piece of equipment, okay, so you have 10 of these guitars in stock, and on the toy show the other night there was somebody using the exact same guitar, and everybody now wants one of Santa for Christmas. There's big demand for the whole thing coming out there. So what way to manage that? Now, I'm not going to tell you that you have to do it this way, right? But what I want you to do is to actually think out your process. And I want you to try and consider this process as a deliberate action, rather than I've coded all this, so that's the way it's going to be, right? So we need to have a, a process, kind of non-complete, or I'll just call it tricky, stock levels. Okay. So how to handle our stock levels or shopping cart experiences. Right. So something to just consider, right? How do we manage this, right? And it's not just as easy as you might think, okay? So what do we have at the moment, right? We have a situation where we've got our registration and login. And again, with that, your with registration, you might be looking there and saying, well, do you check in email slash username, kind of repeats and that kind of stuff. So you can only log in, or you can only register one email address on your system. So if I register today with my email address and then I forget about it, and next Christmas I'm back on again, hopefully ordered something else, and I think I have to register again, you'll need something in. When I put my email address in, you need something to come back in and say, hey, you've actually registered here already, you don't want to do it again. Log in again, you need little features, obviously, to log in, check the username and password, but you need to decide, is that looking at username, is it looking at the email address? If you're allowing the user to create their own username rather than use the email address, then you need to have a check to make sure that the same username isn't used more than once on your website. It's probably a good idea not to have the same username all the time anyhow. But you have your login there. You've got things like forgot password, forgot username. Okay. So again, these are all kind of standard features, but you'll need to have these inserted into the system for you. Okay. So we sort of have this kind of iterative kind of process where we put out our kind of main issues here. I didn't think that would work just as well as I thought. Oops. We put out our main issue, and we just expand on it then a little more as we go through. Okay. So we need to manage our stock level, right? Another thing we need to do here is we need to process the reserve So this is going to be a situation where somebody at some point in time, okay, will click a button and say, yes, I've reserved this, okay? So how do we handle that? What needs to happen? So we need to somehow obviously reserve the item. Now, in reserving the item, now we're looking at having some kind of an order process, right? So we'll probably have a new database table, right? We'll need to issue some kind of an order number, or at least some kind of tracking system. Now that will more than likely involve the eventually lead to being able to deliver a number for collection, or a barcode for collection, or a QR code for collection, but it needs to be a unique number. And in that unique number, it will have details then of the different items and the quantities that have been ordered. Okay. Now we need to be able to ID a stock item to a customer. So if we've got, say, 10 items, we're starting off today, we've got 10 items of this guitar in stock, and 4 or 5 people have come in and they've actually reserved that item. Okay, so we've got, let's say, 4 guitars have been reserved. They're sitting over there in the corner, and there's sort of a name associated with each of them, right? That's what would happen if anybody who's done a click and collect recently, what has actually happened there, you do the reservation process online. You'll get some kind of an indication from the store, to either come back in an hour, or you get an email or a text message or something saying that it's ready. Or in some cases, they just tell you, come in, tomorrow morning at 9:30, whatever, at the time of completion. You arrive, and if you're lucky, right, there is somebody there. You give them the number, and you get a lovely bag presented to you with your items in stock, and you pay your money on the spot or whatever, and everything's done. It's nice and handy. Okay. Now, how is that going to be processed? How do we, from a electronic perspective, manage that? Because there's one thing, if you think of, it's sort of like the difference between going into, the takeaway and ordering something and waiting there for it to be delivered, and then, picking it up, paying for it, getting out, to actually ordering it online, going into the takeaway then a while later and picking it up. Okay. So there has to be some way that somebody knows what's been, what is yours and so forth. And we need to track that. We need to figure out how we're actually going to do that. Okay. So probably a good way of doing that is in a new database table, right? But there has to be a narrative around it, a storyline around how it's going to be. So we need to, if you like, outline the process. Just kind of reserve, collect, okay? And that, again, like all coding and all programming, right? If you can't do it in your head, if you can't write down what the process is going to be, you can't do it, okay? It doesn't matter how good you are at coding. If you don't know what you're supposed to code, you cannot code it. So the first step always is to define yourself what is actually happening here and how is it going to happen, right? Now, when we collect, okay, what needs to happen? Obviously, we need to get paid, but we're doing that kind of like a manually kind of situation, right? But we need to obviously reduce the stock level. Okay, that is now sold. That item is no longer just reserved; it's actually sold. So we go and we reduce our actual stock levels itself. Okay. Everybody okay with me so far?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Right. Now, so there are probably, I was saying this probably extra features that you're going to require. Okay, and what I always think with things like this is it's never going to be, it's sort of an iterative process. So you start off at the high level, okay, and then you work into the finer detail piece by piece by piece, okay. So we say, right, we need to register. Your next step then would be, right, what do we need? So we could, for example, take each of these features, we just take registration as a feature, right? What do we need, right? We need to show a page. I always think, and again, there's there is a process here, guys, right? We're in a lot of cases you're doing this for the first time. Okay, so it's sort of a good idea to do a kind of long haul or uh, the long process with it rather than kind of shorthand typing the whole thing around, right? But if you think with the MVC, what's going to happen, right? We're going to have our view, right? So as far as the user is concerned, right, they're looking at a screen and they're doing stuff. They're clicking buttons and they're changing this and doing one thing and the other. Okay. The controller in the background is managing all of that. And what's happening then is there's some kind of new information coming back from the view. Okay. So we need to be thinking about what's going to happen. And what always has to happen in terms of the moving from what we're currently seeing displayed on the screen to the next thing that we're going to see on the screen is all done by passing a variable from the client to the controller. I've been calling it action. Okay, so what action do we need at this point in time? Okay, so let's take a kind of a shorthand on that is to actually identify as we're typing what we're going to call that action, right? So how are we going to get to a point where we actually can see the registration display, right? We start off, we go to the website and we have our home page. So we know, as said, from the existing music app, there's defaults there for action and there's default for categories and it'll display the categories. You will be deciding yourself what your home page is going to be, right? That's up to you. I'll leave that up to yourselves, right? But what we want to do for registration is we need to be able to show a registration page, right? So most likely, okay, we're not saying you have to do this, most likely click a button. So there's a button up there saying, register or sign up or something like that, okay? Now, by clicking that button, that's going to send a message with the variable action equal to something. I'm just going to call it show reg page, right? Okay, so that's going to be the action value that's going to be sent. Now, if we're looking at, say, having a button and having it as a a link using the get method, right? What I could actually have, I'm not going to do this for everyone, but just as an example here, around the button, I could have an A tag with a href equal to question mark action equals show page. Okay. And then there. Well, actually, no, that we're going to have it inside a button, aren't we? No, I think that's the way. I think that's the way that the let's see, action there, boom slash a, right. I'm not saying 100% that that is the way the code is going to be, but it'll be something like that. So we're going to have a button with just sign up on it, and that's going to be stuck inside an anchor, and the anchor is passing a H reference where we've got question mark action is equal to show underscore reg underscore page. Okay, so what happens is when you click the button, it's going to go to the controller, because we're going back to the same page, okay? And it's going to show the reg, okay? That's going to be the value of action that's going to be sent to the controller. So in our controller then, we're going to have this controller action switch. I'll put it over here. And it might even help to spell it properly. Right. We're going to have a case, show reg page. Okay. Now, there's going to be some code in there until we get to break, right? Now, we think about it and we say, right, okay, what do we need to show at this point in time, right? We want to be able to display our page, okay? We don't need to collect any data from the input or from the client because it's a new user, okay? So this would be fairly straightforward. We'll probably just do something like include slash because we're in the controller. Go to view,